Hello, my name is Jonathan Fanning and I'm a Senior Lecturer in International Strategy at the School of Business and Society, which is at the University of York in the United Kingdom. And I'm going to give you a short lecture now on the nature of change in organisations. Change is a constant. The one thing that we are certain of is that change will happen. It's important that we can control that change and can we deal with that change in a manner that is best for our organisation. It is important to go into change with our eyes open and to understand what change is and what it means and how we can best control it. So the first question is, what is change? So very simply, it is the movement over time from where you are at the moment, a current position, perhaps we could write P1, and it is to move to a future position P2. And a general and broader definition of that is that there is an emerging uncertain future. That is one thing that's guaranteed. The future is uncertain. The future is not planned. The future is not guaranteed. But it is possible for us to try and plan and manage our movement into that future in such a manner that we can try and get on with securing those objectives we want to achieve, and we can avoid the impact of the unplanned and unforeseen. If anyone tells you they can predict the future, then you know they are fraud. The future is fundamentally unknowable. But that does not mean that we cannot be prepared for it in some ways. And so change in a management perspective is about dealing with the unforeseen and preparing ourselves for the unforeseen and allowing us to go as far as possible towards our objectives. So as long as we're clear in where we're going and clear in what we're trying to achieve, then we need not fear the unknown. Change is itself a balancing act. There are two major impacts on change. There are two areas in which we have to consider. One thing is, do we need to change? Change should not be done just for the sake of change, but we should always be aware of the fact that if we do not allow for the possibility of change, then what we create will become ossified, that things will not be able to be adapted. There's also, of course, the fact, as they say, the tree that will not bend will break. The idea is that if the wind blows hard and you do not give some space, some ideas towards the changes of the winds of the fortune in the future, then you are more likely to break. You must have some ability to adapt. So it's important not to become ossified. It's important not to become, as we call it, change impaired, unable to change. But if we do not have some stability, if we do not have some way of permanent operation, something that keeps us together, then in fact the force of instability will eventually cause us to disintegrate and fall apart. So it's getting this balancing between the two that is so important. So what we talk about success then is then we can get some balance between the frozen stability, between ossification, and between chaos when we actually just give in and change all the time with no plan and no organisation towards it. So that is what we're looking for. We're trying to get that balance. So that's a definition of some nature of organisational change. So shown on the right, and they talk about two different specific types of change. They talk about top-down change. Top-down change is the idea that change comes from above, that management comes in, that the top leadership of an organisation will come in and make decisions, and they will tell you exactly what the change is going to be. And the idea of that is that this major change is initiated with the goal to comprehensive impact the organisation and to improve its performance. But the decisions and the understanding is that of the leadership of the organisation. But even in this case, change that is trying to be done without the support of middle and lower level workers is change that will not succeed. So it's vitally important that an organisation that wishes to have proper change is able to bring those workers on board with it. Equally, the other form of change that they consider is bottom-up change. And this is the idea that management is not ignored, but actually change can come from anywhere of an organisation. That effectively you empower, in the real term, meaning of the term, empowerment is a term that is much abused, all parts of an organisation to say, this isn't working. This needs changing. We need to do something a bit different. And this approach is crucial if you want to be an innovative organisation. You must enable people throughout your organisation to make the changes that are needed in order for you to adapt and for order you to survive and improve over time. You must be clear with this, that the only way bottom-up change can be achieved is if you have genuine employee empowerment, a word that is much abused, which often talk about responsibility. But actually what we're talking about here is saying to giving employees the possibility to look at a situation and to make real change. It must also have clear employee involvement. Employees must actually have their opinions taken. They must have a way to influence the way the change will happen, not just what the change is, and they must be active employee participation. I.e., when you set up your change plans, when you set up your change groups, when you set up your negotiations, etc., you must bring employees on board. They must take part and they must play an active role in doing it. That is the only way you can get bottom-up change. So, which is preferable? Well, as there's many of these things, of course, it is really a dialectic. It is not preferable to the other, but actually you need to understand, for a good possibility for integrated change leadership, you need to understand how you would bring them together. And so the idea is that if you're going to have long-term successful change, you must combine the advantages of top-down and bottom-up approaches. Okay? The top-down approach has the advantage that they have the power to break up traditional patterns. It's very difficult for people at the bottom of an organisation to change the historic way an organisation has operated, to change the historic power balances within the organisation. If we are to make those changes, then they must be done from the top down. The bottom-up change also cannot be responsible for making difficult economic adjustments if wages need to be changed, if workers need to be recruited, or workers need to be made redundant. These are the sort of decisions that have to be made at the top of an organisation. If more money is to be made available, if less money is to be made available, all these are strategic decisions, and again, they will be mostly made top-down. So you need to get the top-down approach right in order to break up the existing situation. This is to stop the ossification of an organisation. That is the top-down responsibility. However, the bottom-up responsibility requires people to understand that throughout an organisation they need to contribute, they need to look at what's going on, they need to think about it, and they need to make changes that they believe are sustainable. Change merely imposed from above is not change that is long-term sustainable. It also requires an organisation to build what we would call a capability for organisational learning. Organisational learning is sometimes known as organisational memory. It's when an organisation learns what it has done, what has been useful, what has been an effective way of doing things, and it keeps that on board. This is much more difficult than you may think. Many organisations make changes, and then the people who have implemented those changes leave or move on or go on to somewhere else or go on for the next project. Quite often, if this change has been successful, they get promotion. Change has been unsuccessful, they are vilified and removed. Whereas the reality is, from both, whether change is successful or not, you need to get people to come in and give their interpretation of what happened, their understanding of what happened, so that you can understand what is the nature of organisational learning, so you can understand what worked and what didn't, so you can take this memory forward. An organisation without memory is destined to fail. So what is it we have that actually threatens effective ethical change? There is a huge number of impacts that can affect on this. This is quite a few of them, but it is not all of them. At the centre of this diagram, we're looking at the idea that we're trying to have an effective change management system, and we want that to be done ethically insofar as it is takes on board the needs of the internal and external stakeholders. So ethical change is change which it may impact some people negative, but it is an attempt to make it as easy and to make it as less impact negatively as possible. It's an understanding of the fact that it might well be about the internals of the organisation, but you also consider the larger environment in which you operate. So what can it cause it? Well, clearly if you have no vision and leadership, then you're going to have problems. If on top of that, even if you have good vision and leadership, you're unable to communicate, either through the inability to spread ideas or a lack of trust that your ideas come out. If an organisation is one of egoism, where you actually look at the needs of the individual rather than the needs of the many, do that, and you actually think about it as being all about that, this will probably be more of a top-down approach. If you become so paralysed by the fact we know the future is unknowable, but which is understanding there are unknown unknowns as well as known unknowns and understanding how to deal with them. If your planning is always reactionary, i.e. you don't actually think what shall we do if something happens, you just wait for it to happen and then simply react to it. If there is a very, very vague commitment to change, if people are actually saying, yes, we're going to change, but we don't really want to, or the leadership aren't going to provide the money for it, or there's going to be no finance, there's going to be no support. For the classic is that there's a lack of support given to change management, lack of understanding about how much time goes on with this. And so the important thing is to make sure that you actually, there's commitment, and real commitment means real support. People have to be held accountable. This doesn't necessarily mean punished, but it's understanding. It looks back at trust and communication. How do you get people to talk one another, to understand one another, to understand how it's going on? Change must happen fast enough to have an effect, but not so quickly that people become overwhelmed with it. That's when the importance of understanding the rapidity of change and the importance of what is the good speed and what is the bad speed. Also to understand the maintenance of silos. By this, what do we mean is that organisations will exist with things being done in certain ways in certain places. Now, those must be overcome. But they mustn't be overcome for the sake of it. It must be that if these silos are a block on change or block on effective management, then they must be removed or they must be redesigned in a manner that allows them to be going. Power misuse is when people make change to build up their own empires rather than to actually build up and make change that are useful for people. All of these can actually lead to disengagement of stakeholders. If things happen too fast, if people don't have the communication, if they see egoism, if they live in paralysed with fear of the unknown and they lack trust, then actually they will become disengaged. And the opposite of that as well, or the kind of the parallel to that in fact perhaps, is that if you disregard the needs of stakeholders, you must understand what your stakeholders are, who they are, what they need, etc., and do your best to meet them. And again, on top of this, of course, about that, if you're using the internal politics of an organisation and you're using that to achieve egotistic aims, and if you're using that to balance your own power, and if you're doing that to simply react, then this is the inappropriate use of the internal politics. Can only cause you problems in the long term. So what can we do to overcome this? Well, basically, be open. Tell you what your organisation's values are, and then say what the new objectives are and how they align with those values. Changing the values and culture of an organisation, which we look at in other lectures, is itself a very difficult thing. So in fact we can't do that. So therefore we must say gradual change to values perhaps and new objectives that still align with the existing values in order to make sure that people buy in, to get those people to want to be part of the change. We must be open about who's making decisions. We must allow decisions to be challenged. We must allow people to put in have their say. We must open ourselves to truly independent external scrutiny of our change. If we set our objectives, we must appoint someone whose role is to see, are we aligning our values with our objectives? Are we letting people know what our decision making is? Do we understand where the decisions are coming from? We must be clear over what we will do and what we will not do. When we align with our values, there must be lines we will not cross, but there may be other things that we say that actually, in order to be true to our values, these are things that we must do, and we must be clear about doing. And we must make action and take action when boundaries are crossed. If boundaries are real and if we're going to set them, then we must make sure that they are not breached, and when they are breached, that action is taken so that we prove that we are serious about what it is we're trying to achieve. So what is the conundrum of change? What do we mean by that? This is the contradiction of it. As I said from the beginning, it is the fact that change is a complex process. By definition, we cannot predict what will be the outcome of any event that we take in the future. We cannot fully control it. We can make estimates, we can make conclusions, we can try and work out what we think will happen, but we cannot know for sure exactly what will happen. That is the nature of the future. If anyone tells you otherwise, then effectively you must understand the future is fundamentally unknowable. And the problem with this, as we all know from other examples, is that the very uncertainty of change stimulates demand for simple answers and simple assurances, easy answers, and some will come across and offer simple answers. They're likely to get a hearing, people are going to listen to them, even if that we know that fundamentally the honesty of it is that change is difficult and and that it is not going to be so easy to do it. Organisational change itself is often characterised as a movement from a present to a future desired state, and that often this unfolds in unexpected ways, whether planned for or not. This is the idea of considering what we'll look at, the idea of planned versus emergent change. The simple reality, as we said, an organisation cannot ossify. So if you decide that change is not for you, unfortunately the world may disagree with you, and it may well be that change happens to you. Therefore it is always best to be planning for it.